They were dying, and everyone knew it. High Priestess stood at the window of the great temple, watching her world burn. The sky above had turned black with smoke and something worse. The swarm had arrived 3 weeks ago, and in that short time, they had destroyed everything they had built over 10,000 years. Cities that once touched the clouds now lay in ruins. Forests that had stood for centuries were nothing but ash. The oceans themselves had begun to change color as the corruption spread through the water. 3 billion had lived on this world at the start of the invasion. Now, less than half remained, and that number shrank every hour. The fleet had tried to stop them. 2,000 ships had risen to defend their home. The battle had lasted 4 hours. When it ended, only 17 vessels remained, hiding in the shadow of their largest moon like wounded animals. Turned away from the window, she could not watch anymore. Her purple skin had grown pale with exhaustion, and her 4 eyes were red from tears she refused to let fall. As High Priestess, she had to be strong. Her people needed hope, even if she had none left to give. "The council has made their decision," said Elder, entering the chamber. He was old, even by standards, and walked with the help of a staff made from sacred wood. "They have approved your request." Closed her eyes. "They think I am mad." "They think you are desperate," corrected gently. "And they are not wrong, but desperate times call for desperate measures. If the old stories are true, if the beacon can truly summon the guardians, then perhaps we have a chance." The beacon was ancient. It sat in the deepest chamber of the great temple, covered in dust and forgotten by all but the most devoted scholars. According to legend, it was a gift from beings of immense power who had protected the galaxy in ages past. When activated, it would send a call across the stars, and the guardians would come. No one believed the legends anymore. They were stories for children, nothing more. But they were very real, and they were coming. In 2 days, perhaps 3, they would reach the capital, and then it would be over. Made her way down into the temple depths. The stairs were old and worn, carved by hands that had turned to dust long ago. The air grew cold and still as she descended. Finally, she reached the chamber where the beacon waited. It was smaller than she had expected. A simple pillar of dark metal, covered in symbols that no living could read. Approached it slowly, placing her hands on its surface. The metal was warm, almost alive. "I do not know if anyone will hear this," she whispered. "I do not know if the stories are true, but my people are dying and I have nothing left but faith. Please, if anyone is listening, we need help." She pressed her hands harder against the beacon, pouring every bit of hope and desperation into the ancient device. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the symbols began to glow with soft blue light, and felt something pulse outward from the pillar, spreading in all directions like ripples on water. The signal raced across space, faster than light, older than empires. It passed dead worlds and living ones, through nebulae and around black holes. It traveled for what felt like an eternity but was actually only seconds. And then it found Earth. In the city of Seoul, deep beneath the surface, Admiral Park was having a very boring day. The United Earth Defense Force had been at peace for almost 20 years, and while was grateful for that peace, he sometimes missed the excitement of his younger days. Now he spent most of his time reading reports and attending meetings. He was reviewing supply requests for the orbital stations when every screen in the command center flickered and went dark. Looked up, frowning. Power failures were rare in military facilities. Then the screens came back to life, but they no longer showed supply reports. Instead, they displayed a series of coordinates and a message that had been automatically translated into Korean. The message was simple. "We are dying, please help US." Stared at the words for a long moment. Around him, officers were scrambling, trying to understand what was happening. The signal had cut through every layer of military encryption like it was not there. That should have been impossible. "Where did this come from?" demanded. "Checking now, sir," replied Lieutenant Commander, his aide. Her fingers flew across her console. The origin point is, sir, this cannot be right. The signal came from a star system 847 light-years away. That is beyond our explored space. Yes, sir, by a significant margin. Looked at the message again. We are dying, please help US. Such simple words, such desperate words. Within the hour, the United Earth Defense Council had assembled. Leaders from every major nation argued and debated. Some said it was a trap, designed to lure humanity into an ambush. Others said it was a test of some kind, perhaps from a more advanced civilization. A few suggested ignoring it entirely. Vice Admiral listened to the arguments with growing impatience. She was a soldier, not a politician, and she had little tolerance for endless debate while someone might be dying. Finally, she stood and addressed the council. We can argue about what this signal means for days, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. But there is only one question that matters. If this is real, if someone out there is truly calling for help, can we live with ourselves if we do nothing? The room fell silent. I cannot, continued, and I do not believe any of you can either. We became explorers because we wanted to find others in the darkness. Well, we may have found them, and they need us. The vote was taken that night. It was unanimous. Admiral Park was given command of the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. 12 carrier groups, 400 warships, 200,000 soldiers, pilots, engineers, and medics. They would travel farther than any human had gone before to answer a call from someone they had never met. They called it Operation Answered Prayer. As the fleet prepared to depart, stood on the observation deck of his flagship, the UEDS Indomitable. The massive carrier hummed with energy as its engines warmed up. Around it, hundreds of other ships were doing the same. Do you think they are real? Asked, standing beside him. Watched the stars for a long moment before answering. I think someone is scared and alone and asked for help, and I think that is enough. The fleet departed 3 days later. The wormhole drives activated, tearing holes in space itself. One by one, the ships vanished into the light, racing toward a world they had never seen, to fight an enemy they did not know, for people they had never met. Humanity was coming. The expected angels, they got something stranger. High Priestess had not slept in 2 days. She had stayed at her post in the command bunker, watching the screens and waiting for something to happen. They had reached the outer edges of the capital city. In a few more hours, they would break through the final defensive line, and then it would be over. She was about to give the order to evacuate when the sensors screamed a warning. What is happening? She demanded, rushing to the main display. The officer at the console was shaking. Priestess, there are energy readings above the planet, massive ones. Something is coming through. Looked up at the screen and felt her heart stop. Space itself was tearing open, not in one place but in dozens. Great wounds of light appeared in the darkness above, and from each wound came ships, massive ships, ships bigger than anything they had ever built. The first vessel through was enormous. It was nearly 3 kilometers long, covered in weapons and armor that the instruments could not even identify. Behind it came more ships, destroyers, cruisers, battleships, carriers that launched smaller craft even as they emerged from the wormholes. The sky above filled with steel and fire. By the ancestors, Elder whispered. The beacon worked, the guardians have come. Could not speak. She could only watch as the fleet spread out above her dying world. On board the Indomitable, Commander Shin surveyed the scene below with cold eyes. She had seen war before, but nothing like this. The planet's surface was covered with spreading darkness, like an infection consuming healthy flesh. Cities burned, oceans boiled, and everywhere the swarmed like insects. All wings, this is Vanguard Actual, she broadcast on the fleet channel. We have confirmed hostile contact. Weapons are free. Protect the locals, kill everything else. The human fleet did not wait for the enemy to react. They attacked. Lieutenant Bay launched from the carrier bay of the Relentless in his F-217 Spectre fighter. Around him, hundreds of other pilots did the same, their small craft screaming toward the planet at incredible speeds. The noticed them almost immediately and began to respond. The first wave of defenders rose to meet the human fighters. They were organic-looking things, part flesh and part metal, with weapons built into their bodies. There were thousands of them, and they moved with terrible speed. Smiled behind his helmet, finally something to shoot at. His weapons locked onto the nearest targets and opened fire. Plasma bolts tore through bodies, sending pieces of chitin and metal spinning into the void. Around him, his squadron did the same. The sky filled with explosions and burning debris. "Reaper, you have 3 on your tail," his wingman shouted through the comm. Did not bother to look. He cut his engines, spun his craft around, and fired backward while still moving forward. 2 of his pursuers exploded. The third took a direct hit but kept coming, so he fired again. It died. "Thanks for the warning," he said calmly, spinning back around and continuing his attack run. They had never faced human pilots before. They did not understand these small, fast creatures who flew directly into danger instead of away from it. Every tactic they tried was countered within minutes. When they grouped together, human bombers hit them with area weapons. When they spread out, human fighters picked them off one by one. While the battle raged in orbit, the ground invasion began. Colonel Myra stood in the drop pod bay of the carrier Soul's Pride, watching her Marines prepare for deployment. 50,000 soldiers would hit the ground in the first wave, with more coming after. Their mission was simple: establish a beachhead, link up with local survivors, and start pushing the back. 30 seconds to drop, the ship's voice announced. Myra sealed her helmet and stepped into her pod. The metal coffin closed around her with a hiss. She had done this many times before, but it never got easier. There was something deeply unnatural about being shot at a planet like a bullet. "All Marines sound off," she ordered. The responses came back, thousands of voices confirming they were ready. These were the best soldiers humanity had. They had trained for years. They had fought in conflicts across human space, and now they would fight for someone they had never met. Drop in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The pods launched. Myra felt the acceleration press her into her seat as the pod screamed through the atmosphere. Through the tiny window, she could see fire. The heat shields glowed white-hot as the pod fell. Around her, thousands of other pods made the same journey, looking like meteors from below. They saw them coming. They thought the humans were using some kind of orbital bombardment and prepared to weather the attack. They did not understand that these were not bombs. They were delivery systems. The pods hit the ground with tremendous force, crashing through formations and burying themselves in the earth. Then the doors blew open, and the humans came out fighting. Myra emerged from her pod with her rifle already firing. 3 fell before they could react. Around her, Marines were doing the same, pouring out of their pods and engaging everything that moved. The sound of gunfire filled the air, mixed with the screaming of dying. "Push forward," Myra shouted. "Secure the landing zone." They fought back. They were strong and fast, with claws that could tear through armor and acid that could melt steel. But the humans did not stop. When soldiers fell, others took their places. When weapons ran dry, they fixed bayonets and kept fighting. Private First Class Nam was 19 years old and terrified. This was his first real combat, and it was nothing like the simulations. They were everywhere, screaming and clawing and dying. He fired his rifle until it was empty, then picked up a fallen comrade's weapon and kept shooting. A warrior lunged at him, claws reaching for his throat. Ducked, drove his bayonet into the creature's chest, and twisted. They died with a horrible gurgling sound, pulled his weapon free and looked for the next target. "Good kill, Private," Sergeant Hand shouted, appearing beside him. She was covered in alien blood but seemed calm, almost relaxed. "Stay close to me. We push forward together." "Yes, Sergeant." By the end of the first hour, the humans had established 3 separate beachheads. By the end of the second hour, they had linked up and begun advancing toward the capital city. They threw everything they had at the invasion, but it was not enough. In the command bunker, High Priestess watched the battle unfold with growing disbelief. The strange beings from the stars were winning, not just holding the line, but actually pushing the back for the first time since the invasion began. "Who are they?" she whispered. Elder stood beside her, his old eyes fixed on the screen. "The signal was meant for gods," he said slowly. "Perhaps we received something better." Above the planet, the orbital battle was ending. The defenders had been scattered, their numbers reduced to almost nothing. Human carriers moved into position, launching wave after wave of reinforcements. Supply ships began their descent, carrying weapons and medicine and food. Admiral Park watched from the bridge of the Indomitable, his face unreadable. They had won the first battle, but the war was just beginning. The still held most of the planet, and somewhere out there, their main fleet was gathering. "Signal all ships," he ordered. "Phase 1 is complete. We hold this ground. No matter what comes next, we hold." The humans had arrived, and they were not leaving. The shelter doors had been sealed for 11 days. Inside, 3,000 survivors huddled together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of their world being consumed. They had run out of food 2 days ago. The water would last perhaps another day. After that, it would not matter. High Priestess had stayed with her people, refusing to evacuate to the command bunker. If they were going to die, she would die with them. It was the only thing she could still give them. The sounds outside had changed in the last few hours. Where before there had been the wet, terrible noise of the consuming everything, now there was something else. Explosions, gunfire, screaming that did not sound like voices. Then silence. Everyone in the shelter held their breath. The silence stretched on and on. Finally, there was a knock on the door, not the scratching of claws, but an actual knock. "Hello," a voice called from outside. The language was strange, but the translation device built into the shelter made it understandable. "Is anyone in there? We are here to help." Approached the door slowly. Her hands were shaking. This could be a trick. They were clever, but something in her heart told her it was not. She opened the door. A human woman stood on the other side. She was wearing strange armor that covered her entire body, but her helmet was off, revealing a face unlike anything had ever seen. The woman was small by standards, with pale skin and dark eyes and hair the color of night. Behind her stood more humans, all carrying weapons that still smoked from recent use. "I am Sergeant First Class Hand," the woman said. Her voice was gentle, almost kind. "You called for help, we came." Stared at her for a long moment. This small, fragile-looking creature was one of the Guardians. She looked like she could be broken with one hand. "You are so small," whispered. Smiled. It was a strange expression, but somehow warm. "We get that a lot, do not worry. We are tougher than we look." The evacuation of the shelter took several hours. Human medics treated the sick and wounded, while soldiers distributed food and water. The survivors looked at their rescuers with a mixture of fear and gratitude. These strange beings had come from across the stars to save them. It seemed impossible. A young child approached while she was directing her soldiers. The child tugged on her armor and looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. "Are you an angel?" the child asked. Knelt down so she was at eye level with the child. "No," she said softly, "just a soldier, but I promise you we will keep you safe. That is what we do." The ground war had begun in earnest. Colonel Myra established her command post in the ruins of what had once been a museum. The building was damaged but still standing, and its thick walls provided good protection against attacks. From here, She coordinated the advance of 5 divisions, over 100,000 soldiers pushing across 3 continents. They did not give ground easily. They were ancient and powerful, and they had consumed entire civilizations before humanity even existed. Every block of every city had to be taken by force. Every kilometer of every road was paid for in blood. Captain O led his company through the streets of a town whose name he could not pronounce. The buildings around him were burning, and the air was thick with smoke and the smell of death. Warriors lurked in every shadow, waiting to ambush the advancing humans. "Contact left," someone shouted. Spun and fired, his rifle punching holes through a that had been about to leap onto one of his soldiers. The creature fell, twitching, and another soldier finished it with a burst to the head. "Keep moving," ordered. "We stop, we die." They adapted quickly. When human weapons proved effective, they grew thicker armor. When humans used explosives, they learned to scatter. When humans attacked at night, they developed better senses to detect them. But humans adapted faster. When they grew armor against plasma weapons, the humans switched to kinetic rounds that punched through any defense. When they scattered, human artillery covered entire areas with devastating fire. When they hunted at night, human soldiers used thermal vision and attacked anyway. Private Nam had changed in the weeks since landing. The scared boy who had nearly died in his first battle was gone. In his place was a soldier, hard and efficient and deadly. He had killed so many that he had lost count. His friends had started calling him Ghost because of how silently he moved through the ruins. "Ghost, we have movement up ahead," his squad leader reported. Raised his rifle and looked through the scope. 3 were moving through the rubble, trying to flank the human position. They had not seen him yet. "I have them," he said quietly. 3 shots, 3 kills. He lowered his weapon without changing expression. "Good shooting," Sergeant said, appearing beside him. She had been his mentor since his first battle, teaching him how to survive in this hell. "You have come a long way, Private." "Thank you, Sergeant." "Do not thank me yet. The hard part is still coming." She was right. 2 weeks into the ground campaign, the finally revealed itself. There was the guiding intelligence of the swarm. It was ancient beyond measure, a collective consciousness that had absorbed the minds of countless species over thousands of years. It had never known defeat. It had never known fear, and it could not understand these strange creatures who refused to die. "Why do you fight?" The broadcast, its psychic voice touching every human mind on the planet. "You cannot win. You are small and weak and mortal. Every species runs eventually. Why do you stay and die?" Captain felt the voice in his head like ice water. Around him, his soldiers had stopped, clutching their heads against the mental assault. But none of them ran. None of them broke. Keed is calm and responded, knowing somehow that they would hear. "We do not fight because we are not afraid. We fight because someone asked for help, and where we come from, that means something." They did not understand. Fear was its weapon. It had broken species far older and stronger than humanity with nothing but terror. But these humans acknowledged their fear and kept fighting anyway. It made no sense. "You will all die," they warned. "Maybe," replied, "but not today and not without taking you with us." The ground war continued. Human forces pushed forward, liberating city after city, rescuing millions of survivors. They fought for every inch of ground, but they were losing. For the first time in 4,000 years, the swarm was being driven back. Colonel Myra stood on a hilltop overlooking a valley that had been cleansed of influence. Below, human and workers were already beginning to rebuild. Children played in the streets. Families reunited. Life was returning to a world that had been on the edge of death. "We are making a difference," she said to herself. Lieutenant Commander appeared beside her, having come down from the fleet to deliver a report. "Colonel, the Admiral wanted you to know. Fleet movements have been detected at the edge of the system. They are coming." Myra nodded slowly. How many? All of them, their entire home fleet, 6,000 ships. Myra looked up at the sky, where she knew the human fleet was waiting. 400 ships against 6,000. The numbers were not good. Then we had better finish down here quickly, she said. Our people up there are going to need all the help they can get. Above, Admiral Park received the same report. He studied the tactical display for a long moment, watching the approaching enemy fleet. So many ships, so many enemies. Sir asked, "What are your orders?" Straightened his shoulders. "We hold the line, we protect the planet, no matter what." The final battle was coming. The home fleet emerged from wormhole space like a swarm of locusts. 6,000 ships of every size and shape, from small fighters to massive hive carriers that dwarfed even the largest human vessels. They spread across the void in a wave of chitin and metal, blocking out the stars themselves. Admiral Park watched them come from the bridge of the Indomitable. Around him, officers worked in tense silence, updating tactical displays and calculating firing solutions. The mood was grim but determined. "Sir, final count is confirmed," Lieutenant Commander reported. 6,200 enemy vessels. We have 394 combat-capable ships remaining. Nodded slowly. The math was not good. 15-to-1 odds. Any sensible commander would retreat, regroup, and find another way. But retreat meant abandoning. It meant leaving to die. It meant telling the galaxy that humanity only helped when it was convenient. "Signal the fleet," ordered. "All ships form up on my position. We make our stand here." On the bridge of the battleship Unconquered, Vice Admiral received the order without surprise. She had known this moment was coming since they first arrived in the system. They would throw everything they had at the humans, and the humans would either win or die trying. There was no middle ground. "All hands battle stations," she broadcast to her. "This is Vice Admiral. The enemy is here. They outnumber us 15-to-1. By any reasonable measure, we should not be able to win this fight." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But we are not reasonable people. We came here because someone needed help. We stayed because leaving was never an option. And we will fight today because that is who we are. Not for glory, not for conquest, for the people below us who have nowhere else to go." Across the fleet, soldiers and sailors heard her words. Some prayed, some laughed, some simply checked their weapons and prepared to do their jobs. All of them were afraid, none of them ran. The fleet advanced with terrible confidence. They had destroyed armadas before. They had consumed civilizations that made humanity look like children playing with toys. What were 400 ships against the might of the swarm? They were about to find out. "All ships engage," ordered. The human fleet moved forward, not in retreat, not in defense, but in attack. Carriers launched wave after wave of fighters that screamed toward the enemy formation. Destroyers accelerated to flank speed, their weapons already firing. Battleships advanced in a steady line, their massive guns tracking targets. Lieutenant Bay was in the first wave of fighters. His squadron had been reduced from 12 pilots to 7 during the ground campaign, but the survivors were the best of the best. They flew through the void like ghosts, weaving between enemy fire and leaving destruction in their wake. "Reaper enemy fighters inbound," his wingman reported. "Lots of them." Checked his display. Over 1,000 interceptors were rising to meet them. The numbers were overwhelming. "Then we have a target-rich environment," replied. "All wings, pick your targets and fire at will." The dogfight that followed would become legendary. Human pilots fought with skill and fury that they had never encountered. They flew directly into enemy formations, twisting and spinning through impossible maneuvers. When their weapons ran dry, they rearmed at carriers and returned to the fight. When their ships were damaged, they kept flying until the damage became critical. Only then did they eject, trusting their comrades to finish the job. Lost track of how many he killed, 20, 50, 100. His fighter was held together by willpower and emergency repairs, but it kept flying. He had promised himself that he would not die until the planet was safe. He intended to keep that promise. The main battle lines met with the force of colliding storms. Vice Admiral directed her with cold precision, calling out targets and coordinating fire patterns. The Unconquered shook with every impact, but its shields held. Around it, human ships fought and died and took 10 enemies with them for every one they lost. 7. Reinforce Sector 4, ordered. 3. Take out those carriers. All ships maintain formation and keep firing. They could not understand what was happening. Their tactics had worked overwhelm the enemy with numbers, break their will with fear, consume the survivors. It had never failed. But the humans would not break. They took losses that would have shattered any other fleet and kept fighting. They saw their friends die and responded with anger instead of despair. They were outnumbered, and then they attacked anyway. A hive carrier, nearly 5 kilometers long, moved to engage the Indomitable directly. Watched it approach on the tactical display, calculating the threat. The carrier was surrounded by escorts, protected by fighters, armed with weapons that could gut his ship in a single volley. All batteries target that carrier, he ordered. Coordinate with the Soul's Pride and the Dragon's Breath. Concentrated fire on my mark. 3 human capital ships focused their weapons on a single target. Plasma lances, kinetic slugs, and missiles struck the carrier in a continuous stream. The carrier's shields flickered, failed, and then the weapons hit the hull directly. The carrier exploded in a ball of fire that consumed a dozen smaller ships around it. Target destroyed, reported, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Enemy formation is breaking up. Press the advantage, ordered. Do not let them regroup. On the surface of billions of watched the battle through any screen they could find. They saw the human ships advancing against impossible odds. They saw the falling by the hundreds, then thousands. They saw hope. High Priestess stood in the restored communication center, watching the feeds with tears running down her face. These strange beings from across the stars were dying for her people, dying for people they had never met. She had asked for help, and they had given everything. The swarm is retreating, an officer reported, his voice filled with disbelief. They are actually retreating. It was true. The fleet, what remained of it, was pulling back. They had lost over 4,000 ships. Their fighters were scattered. Their command structure was broken. For the first time in their ancient history, the swarm was running from a fight. Admiral slumped in his chair, exhaustion washing over him. They had done it. Against all odds, against every reasonable expectation, they had won. Sir said quietly, we lost 83 ships, over 20,000 dead. Closed his eyes. 20,000 humans who would never go home. 20,000 families who would receive the worst news of their lives. The cost of victory was always paid in blood. They did not die for nothing, he said finally. They died protecting people who needed help. That is the best death any soldier can ask for. The battle was over, but the war was not finished yet. Somewhere on the surface of the still lived, and as long as it lived, the threat remained. Vice Admiral looked at the tactical display, at the scattered remnants of the fleet fleeing into deep space. They had won the battle in the sky. Now it was time to win the war on the ground. Signal Colonel Myra, she ordered. Tell her to find thee and end this. The final hunt was about to begin. That had hidden itself well. It had burrowed deep beneath the surface of, surrounding itself with the strongest warriors the swarm had left. For 4,000 years, it had consumed civilizations from the safety of its throne. It had never had to fight for its own survival. Until now. Sergeant Han led the assault team through the tunnels beneath the capital. Behind her came 50 of the best soldiers humanity had, armed with the heaviest weapons they could carry. They had been fighting for 3 days straight, pushing deeper and deeper into the hive. Most of them were wounded. None of them stopped. "Movement ahead," Private Nam reported, his voice calm despite the danger. He had become a different person since the war began. The scared boy was gone, replaced by a warrior who had seen the worst and refused to break. Raised her hand, signaling the team to halt. Through the darkness ahead she could see shapes moving. Guardians, the largest and most powerful warriors of the swarm. They were waiting. "We go through them," said quietly. "Thee is just past this position. We end this now." The team moved forward. The battle in the tunnels was brutal and close. Human soldiers fought warriors in spaces so tight that weapons sometimes could not be used. Soldiers died with their hands around throats, taking their enemies with them. The walls ran with blood, both red and black. Fought beside, covering her back as she pushed forward. A claw caught his arm, tearing through armor and flesh, but he ignored the pain and kept firing. Another lunged at from behind and killed it before it could reach her. "Thank you," gasped. "Thank me when we are done," replied. They broke through the final line of defenders and emerged into a massive chamber. The waited for them there, a vast creature of twisted flesh and metal, pulsing with ancient malice. It was larger than a building, covered in eyes and mouths and limbs that seemed to shift and change as they watched. "You have come to die," the said, its psychic voice pressing against their minds like a physical weight. "Like all species before you, like all species to come." Stepped forward, her weapon raised. She was exhausted, wounded, and covered in the blood of friends and enemies. But she was not afraid. "We came because someone asked for help," she said, "and we are going to finish what we started." The laughed, a terrible sound that echoed through the chamber. "You cannot kill me. I am eternal. I am the swarm. I am." Fired. The blast caught thee in one of its many eyes. The ancient creature screamed, more from surprise than pain. Nothing had dared to attack it directly in centuries. "Everyone open fire," shouted. The surviving soldiers unleashed everything they had. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds and explosive shells tore into this flesh. The creature thrashed and screamed, sending waves of psychic pain that drove soldiers to their knees. But they kept firing. Felt the trying to break into his mind, trying to fill him with fear and despair. He thought of the scared boy he had been when this war started. He thought of the friends he had lost. He thought of the children playing in the streets of liberated cities. "Not today," he whispered and kept shooting. The died slowly. Its ancient body could sustain incredible damage, but not forever. One by one, its eyes went dark. Its screaming faded to whimpers. Finally, it collapsed, and the psychic presence that had tormented the galaxy faded to nothing. The swarm, across the entire planet and beyond, felt their master die. Without the to guide them, they became confused, lost, purposeless. Human forces found them wandering aimlessly or fighting among themselves. The threat was over. Sargent sat down heavily, her back against the wall of the chamber. Around her, the surviving members of her team were doing the same. Of the 50 who had entered the tunnels, only 17 remained. "We did it," said, sitting beside her. His arm was still bleeding, but he did not seem to notice. "We did it," agreed. She looked at the dead, then at the young soldier beside her. "You did good, Private. Your friends would be proud." Did not reply. He just looked at the ceiling of the cave and let out a long, slow breath. The liberation of was declared complete 3 days later. The war that had threatened to consume an entire civilization had ended in victory. Human forces began the long process of helping to rebuild their world. High Priestess held a ceremony to honor the humans who had saved her people. Thousands of gathered to watch as Admiral Park accepted their gratitude on behalf of humanity. The translator struggled to convey the depth of emotion. "We activated the beacon-seeking gods," said, standing before the assembled crowd. "We expected beings of immense power, immortal and untouchable. Instead, we received you." She turned to face directly. "You are small. You are mortal. You bleed and suffer and die. And yet you came to us when we called. You fought for us when you had no reason to. You died for us when you could have simply left. Bow deeply, a gesture of profound respect in culture. We did not receive gods. We received something better. We received friends. News of spread across the galaxy. Other species watched the recordings with shock and disbelief. The swarm had been a terror for 4,000 years, and these newcomers had broken them in 3 months. The Galactic Assembly called an emergency meeting to discuss the implications. What did humanity want? Were they conquerors disguised as liberators? Would they demand territory or tribute? Ambassador addressed the assembly with words that would be remembered for generations. We did not come for conquest, she said simply. We did not come for resources or glory. We came because someone was in trouble and asked for help. That is how we were raised. That is who we are. She looked around at the assembled representatives of 100 species. So here is our offer. If you need help, call us. We will come. That is it. That is the whole deal. The assembly did not know how to respond. Such simple kindness was strange to them. They waited for the hidden condition, the secret price, but there was none. 1 year after the liberation, Lieutenant Commander stood on the observation deck of Station, the newly constructed joint base orbiting the healed planet. Human and ships patrolled together, protecting a world that had been on the edge of extinction. Her communicator chimed. Another distress signal had been detected, this time from a system 2,000 light-years away. Another civilization calling for help. Another chance to make a difference. Smiled and keyed the fleet channel. All hands, this is Station. We have received a distress call. You know what that means. Across the fleet, engines came to life. Pilots ran to their ships. Soldiers checked their weapons. The massive carriers began to move, their wormhole drives warming up. Humanity was going to work. In the years that followed, the legend grew. Species across the galaxy learned that there was someone out there who would come when called, someone who would fight for strangers, someone who believed that helping others was not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. They called humanity many things: guardians, the helping hands, the ones who come. But the humans preferred a simpler title, one that captured everything they were and everything they hoped to be. They called themselves friends. And in a galaxy that had known only darkness for so long, that simple word was the light of all. Sergeant Han, now promoted to lieutenant, stood on the bridge of the carrier Eternal Hope as it prepared for another rescue mission. Beside her stood Private Nam, now a sergeant himself. They had both changed since that first desperate battle on. They had lost friends and gained scars and seen things that would haunt them forever. But they were still here, still fighting, still helping. Ready for another one? Asked. Watched the stars through the viewport, thinking of all the people out there who might be scared and alone and hopping for rescue. Always, she said. The fleet jumped to wormhole space, racing toward another world in need. And somewhere, across the vast darkness between stars, someone who had given up hope looked at the sky and saw ships appearing from nowhere. Help had arrived.